The server room hummed with the familiar white noise of cooling fans and electrical circuits, a sound that had become my lullaby over the past 8 years. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, I was the only soul left in the municipal building, nursing my third cup of coffee while wrestling with a corrupted database that handled the city's payroll system. Nothing like the threat of 3,000 angry city employees not getting paid to make your evening memorable. My name is Reid Trenner, and I'm 33 years old with the cynical worldview of someone twice my age. I've been the senior IT administrator for this mid-sized Rustbelt city since I was 25, back when I still believed that hard work and loyalty meant something. These days, I know better. The only thing that matters is keeping the digital infrastructure running so the politicians can take credit and the bureaucrats can collect their paychecks. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days fixing everyone else's problems while my own life was slowly falling apart. My wife, Jessa, had been distant for months, our conversations reduced to logistics about bills and schedules. She worked as an HR coordinator for a mid-level consulting firm downtown, the kind of place where everyone wore expensive suits and talked about synergy while shuffling papers around. I was deep in a particularly stubborn piece of code when my phone buzzed against the metal desk. The caller ID showed my sister Maddie's name, which was odd considering she usually went to bed before 10. "Reid?" Her voice sounded strange, tight, with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "Hey, Maddie. What's up? Kinda late for a social call." "Where are you right now?" I glanced around the empty server room, illuminated only by the glow of status lights in my laptop screen. "Work. Fighting with the payroll system. Why? And where's Jessa?" The question hit me like a cold splash of water. I realized I hadn't actually spoken to my wife since this morning, when she'd mentioned something about a quick party with her work friends. She'd been vague about the details, which wasn't unusual lately. "She's out with her colleagues. Some work thing. Maddie, what's going on?" There was a pause that stretched too long, filled with background noise I couldn't quite place. Music, laughter, the sound of a crowd. "Reid, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm at Mom and Dad's anniversary party at the community center, the one Jessa said she couldn't attend because of work." My fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. "What are you talking about?" "She's here, Reid, and she's not with her work friends." The world seemed to tilt slightly. I saved my work with mechanical precision, my mind struggling to process what Maddie was telling me. "What do you mean she's there? She specifically said she couldn't come because of a work obligation." "Reid." Maddie's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to see this. I'm sending you my location. Get here now." The line went silent, leaving me staring at my phone in the sudden silence of the server room. A moment later, a text arrived with an address I recognized, the Riverside Community Center where my parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, an event Jessa had begged off from just 6 hours earlier. I closed my laptop and grabbed my jacket, my mind racing through possible explanations. Maybe she'd finished her work thing early and decided to surprise me. Maybe she'd felt guilty about missing the party and shown up late. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that would make me feel foolish for the cold dread spreading through my chest. The drive across town took 15 minutes through empty streets lined with closed storefronts and flickering streetlights. This city had seen better days, back when the steel mills were running and people had steady work. Now it was the kind of place where young people left for college and never came back, where the downtown core was more empty buildings than occupied ones. The community center sat on a hill overlooking the Allegheny River, a 1960s brick building that had hosted countless weddings, retirement parties, and civic meetings. Tonight, warm light spilled from its windows, and I could hear music drifting across the parking lot as I pulled in next to a row of cars I didn't recognize. I sat in my car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to see. Through the large windows, I could make out figures moving around inside, the shadow play of a party in full swing. My phone buzzed with another text from Maddie. East side of the building, by the dance floor. I got out of the car and walked toward the entrance, my footsteps echoing off the asphalt. The closer I got, the clearer the music became. Some generic pop song that was probably popular with people 10 years younger than me. Through the glass doors, I could see my parents, friends, and family scattered around tables covered in white tablecloths, the remnants of dinner and cake evident in the warm lighting. I pushed through the doors and was immediately hit with the smell of coffee and vanilla cake, mixed with the cologne and perfume of 40 people who dressed up for a celebration. A few heads turned my way, and I caught expressions that ranged from surprise to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Reid!" My mother appeared at my elbow, her face bright with the kind of forced cheer that meant she was trying very hard not to acknowledge whatever elephant was in the room. "I'm so glad you made it. Your father was just asking about you." "Mom, where's Maddie?" She gestured vaguely toward the far side of the room. "Over by the dance floor, I think." "Reid, honey, maybe we should—" But I was already moving, weaving between tables of people who suddenly seemed very interested in their conversations or their drinks. The community center's main room was larger than it looked from outside, with a small dance floor set up at one end where a DJ was playing music from a laptop and a pair of speakers that had seen better days. I spotted Maddie first, standing near the edge of the dance floor with her arms crossed, her face a mask of barely controlled anger. She saw me coming and nodded toward the center of the dancing area. That's when I saw them. Jessa was there, wearing the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, her blonde hair swept up in a style that had probably taken her an hour to perfect. She was dancing with a man I recognized as Mallory, a local real estate agent who drove a BMW and had the kind of artificially white smile that belonged on a billboard. But they weren't just dancing. Jessa was pressed against him in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Her arms around his neck, his hands on her waist, in a grip that spoke of familiarity. They were moving together with the kind of easy intimacy that comes from practice, from comfort, from knowing exactly how the other person's body fits against yours. As I watched, frozen in place, Liam leaned down and whispered something in my wife's ear that made her throw back her head and laugh. It was a sound I hadn't heard from her in months, bright and genuine and completely unguarded. The song ended, and in the brief silence before the next one started, Jessa looked up and saw me standing there. The laughter faded on her face, replaced by an expression I'd never seen before. Not guilt, exactly, but something closer to annoyance at being interrupted. For a moment, we just stared at each other across 20 feet of dance floor while the opening notes of another song began to play. Then, Jessa stepped away from Liam and walked toward me, her chin raised in a gesture I recognized as her preparing for battle. "Reid, I didn't expect to see you here." The casual tone, as if she'd been caught grabbing coffee with a friend instead of grinding against another man at my parents' anniversary party, hit me like a physical blow. "Jessa." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm, too controlled. "I thought you had a work thing tonight." She glanced back at Liam, who was watching our exchange with the kind of smug expression that made me want to rearrange his perfectly symmetrical features. "I did. We finished early and I thought I'd stop by to see your parents." "With him?" "Liam was at the same event. He offered to give me a ride." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired the craftsmanship. Almost. "Right. And the dancing?" A flush crept up her neck, the first sign that her composure was cracking. "We were just being friendly. You're making this into something it's not." I looked around the room and realized that every conversation had stopped. 40 people were pretending not to watch the drama unfolding on the dance floor, but the silence was deafening. I could see my parents near the cake table, my father's hand on my mother's shoulder in a gesture of support or restraint. Friendly. I repeated the word, tasting its bitter edges, Is that what we're calling it? Reid, you're embarrassing yourself. The words hit their mark with surgical precision. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was calculated, deliberate, and had probably been going on longer than I wanted to think about. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing Jessa's face. The woman I'd married 6 years ago had been warm, spontaneous, quick to laugh at my terrible jokes. This person was cold, polished, and looking at me like I was an inconvenience to be managed. "You're right," I said quietly. "I am embarrassing myself." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in her black dress with her real estate agent and 40 witnesses to whatever our marriage had just become. I didn't run, didn't slam doors, didn't make a scene. I just left, walking through the silent crowd and out into the parking lot where the night air felt sharp against my skin. Behind me, I heard the music start up again, the party resuming its rhythm as if nothing had happened. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the building where my parents were celebrating 4 decades of marriage, while mine imploded in real time. My phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Call me when you get home." I started the engine and drove back across town, through streets that looked exactly the same as they had an hour ago, even though everything had changed. The server room was waiting for me, still humming with electronic life, the payroll problem still unsolved. I sat down at my computer and stared at the screen, trying to focus on the code, but all I could see was Jessa's face when she'd looked up and seen me watching. Not guilt, not shame, just annoyance. That's when I knew that whatever happened next, I was going to handle it very differently than she expected. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I stayed in the server room until dawn, ostensibly working on the payroll system, but mostly staring at lines of code while my mind processed what I'd witnessed. By the time the morning shift started arriving, I'd made several decisions that would have surprised the man I'd been 24 hours earlier. The first decision was to document everything. As an IT professional, I understood the value of data. Every system crash, every security breach, every user error left digital footprints that could be traced, analyzed, and used to prevent future problems. I realized that my marriage had been experiencing system failures for months, and I'd been ignoring the warning signs. I drove home at 7:30 in the morning, timing my arrival for when Jessa would normally be getting ready for work. Her car was in the driveway, a silver Accord that she kept meticulously clean. I sat in my truck for a moment, studying the house we'd bought 3 years ago, when we'd still talked about children and retirement plans. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual. Jessa had grown up in a small town where people didn't worry about security, a habit that had always made me nervous. I found her in the kitchen, fully dressed for work, drinking coffee from the mug I'd bought her last Christmas. "You didn't come home last night," she said without looking up from her phone. "I had work to finish." "Right." She scrolled through whatever she was reading with the kind of focused attention that meant she was avoiding eye contact. "About last night." "What about it?" Finally, she looked at me, and I saw something flicker across her face that might have been surprise. Maybe she'd expected me to be angry, to demand explanations or make accusations. Instead, I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter, waiting. "I think you misunderstood what you saw." "Did I?" "Liam and I are just friends. We were at the same networking event, and when it ended early, he suggested we stop by your parents' party. I thought it would be nice to make an appearance." I nodded as if this made perfect sense. "What was the networking event for?" "What?" "The work thing you couldn't miss. What kind of event was it?" She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. "HR professionals. A conference about workplace diversity." "Where?" "The Marriott downtown." "Which room?" "Reid, why are you interrogating me?" "I'm just curious about your work. You don't talk about it much anymore." She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse from the counter. "I need to get to the office." We can discuss this later when you're being rational. After she left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, drinking coffee and thinking about the woman I'd married. Jessa had always been ambitious, driven by a need to prove herself that I'd found attractive when we were dating. She'd grown up as the youngest of 3 daughters, in a family that valued appearance and status above almost everything else. Her mother, Patricia, had made it clear from our first meeting that she considered me a temporary placeholder until Jessa found someone more suitable. I'd thought we'd moved past all that. Apparently, I'd been wrong. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 5 times in 8 years, and spent the day conducting what I privately called reconnaissance. I started with our joint bank accounts, looking for patterns in Jessa's spending that I might have missed. What I found was enlightening. Over the past 4 months, she'd been making regular cash withdrawals of $200, always on Fridays, always from the ATM near her office. She'd also been using her credit card at restaurants I'd never heard of, always for 2 people, always during lunch hours when she claimed to be eating at her desk. The most interesting discovery was a charge from Victoria's Secret for $347, made 6 weeks ago. I'd never seen any evidence of this purchase, which meant either she was hiding the lingerie or giving it to someone else. Next, I checked our phone records. Jessa's call log showed regular contact with a number I didn't recognize, usually late at night or early in the morning. The calls had started 3 months ago and had become increasingly frequent. When I reverse-searched the number online, it came back to Liam Mallory. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the evidence spread across my computer screen. 3 months of secret phone calls, mysterious cash withdrawals, and restaurant charges. The timeline painted a clear picture of a relationship that had been developing while I'd been working late nights and weekend emergencies, keeping the city's digital infrastructure running. The rational part of my mind suggested that I should confront Jessa with this information, demand the truth, and try to work things out through counseling or therapy. The rest of me, the part that had been humiliated in front of my entire extended family, wanted something else entirely. I spent the afternoon researching divorce law in our state, reading about asset division and spousal support. What I learned was sobering. Pennsylvania was an equitable distribution state, which meant that marital assets would be divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. Since Jessa made almost as much money as I did, alimony wouldn't be a factor. The house would probably be sold, and we'd split the proceeds. But there were other considerations. I'd been the one paying most of the bills while Jessa focused on building her career. I'd contributed more to our joint savings account, and I'd been making the mortgage payments for the past year while she dealt with what she'd called temporary cash flow problems. I also discovered that Pennsylvania allowed for fault-based divorce, including adultery. If I could prove Jessa's affair, it might affect the asset division in my favor. That evening, I made dinner and waited for my wife to come home. She arrived at 6:15, 15 minutes later than usual, with an explanation about traffic that sounded rehearsed. "How was your day?" I asked, setting a plate in front of her. "Busy, lots of meetings." "Anything interesting?" She gave me a sharp look. "Not particularly. How was yours? I thought you were sick." "Feeling better. I spent some time organizing our finances. Did you know we've spent almost $3,000 on restaurants in the past 4 months? Have we? I don't really keep track of that stuff." I noticed. There are several places I don't recognize. Chez Laurent, the Riverside Grill, Marcello's. Nice places. Jessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I've had a lot of business lunches lately." "Right. With clients? And colleagues? Anyone I know?" "Reid, what's this about? You're acting strange." I smiled at her, the expression feeling foreign on my face. "I'm just interested in your work. You never talk about it anymore." "There's nothing to talk about, it's just work." "Of course." We ate in silence for a while, and I watched my wife carefully. She was nervous, picking at her food and checking her phone every few minutes. When it buzzed with a text message, she grabbed it quickly and turned it away from me. "Important?" I asked. Just work stuff. At 7 o'clock at night? Some of us have demanding jobs, Reid. The comment was designed to sting, a reference to the ongoing tension about our different career trajectories. Jessa had always been frustrated that I was content with my municipal job instead of pursuing something more lucrative in the private sector. You're right, I said. Some of us do. After dinner, I retreated to my home office while Jessa watched television in the living room. I could hear her talking quietly on the phone, her voice too low for me to make out the words, but the tone unmistakably intimate. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I'd learned, creating a timeline of the affair with supporting evidence. Bank records, phone logs, restaurant receipts, all of it organized with the same methodical approach I used for system troubleshooting. As I worked, I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. The white-hot rage I'd felt at the community center had cooled into something more focused, more purposeful. Jessa had made her choice, and now I was going to make mine. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Attorney Sarah Mitchell had the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that inspired confidence. Her office was downtown, in one of the few buildings that hadn't surrendered to urban decay, and she specialized in family law with what her website called a focus on protecting client interests. Mr. Trenner, I've reviewed the materials you sent over. You've been very thorough. She spread the printed documents across her desk. Bank statements, phone records, photographs from the anniversary party that Maddie had discreetly taken. The evidence of my wife's affair laid out in black and white. What are my options? Well, you have grounds for a fault-based divorce, which could work in your favor regarding asset distribution. The documented evidence of adultery is quite compelling. And if I pursue that route, your wife would likely contest it, which means a longer, more expensive process. But given the strength of your evidence, she'd probably settle rather than go to trial. I nodded, absorbing this information. What about the joint assets? The house, savings accounts, retirement funds, all of that would be subject to equitable distribution. However, if you can demonstrate that marital funds were used to support the affair, that could be considered marital waste. Marital waste? Using joint money for purposes that don't benefit the marriage. Those restaurant bills, for instance. If your wife was using marital funds to wine and dine her lover, that's money that should be credited back to you in the final settlement. I left the lawyer's office with a clear understanding of my legal position and a plan for moving forward. But first, I needed to gather more evidence. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I left work early and drove to Jessa's office building. The consulting firm where she worked occupied 3 floors of a glass tower that had been built during the city's last economic boom in the 1990s. I parked across the street and waited. At 5:30, employees began streaming out of the building. I spotted Jessa's blonde hair and watched as she walked to her car alone. She drove out of the parking garage and turned left, away from our house. I followed at a distance, feeling like a character in a bad movie, but unable to stop myself. Jessa's car wound through downtown and into the Riverside district, where old warehouses had been converted into upscale condos and trendy restaurants. She parked outside Marcello's, one of the restaurants from our credit card statements. Through the window, I could see Liam Mallory waiting at a table for 2. I sat in my truck and watched them have dinner, their body language intimate and comfortable. They held hands across the table, shared food from each other's plates, and laughed at private jokes. It was the kind of easy affection that Jessa and I had once shared back when we'd first started dating. When they left the restaurant, they walked to Liam's BMW together. Jessa got in the passenger seat, and they drove to a condo complex I recognized as Riverside Towers, the most expensive residential building in the city. I waited in the parking lot for 2 hours. Jessa didn't come back out. The drive home was surreal. I kept expecting to feel devastated, betrayed, heartbroken. Instead, I felt oddly detached, as if I was watching someone else's life fall apart. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made another decision. Jessa came home at 11:30 with an elaborate story about a work emergency that had required her to stay late at the office. I listened without comment, nodding in appropriate places, even expressing sympathy for her stressful day. "You're being very understanding," she said, studying my face suspiciously. "I'm trying to be supportive of your career. That's new. People change." Over the next week, I established a routine. I went to work, performed my job with mechanical efficiency, and spent my lunch hours conducting surveillance on my wife's affair. I documented their meetings, photographed them together, and built a comprehensive record of their relationship. What surprised me was how careless they'd become. They met in public places, showed physical affection where anyone could see them, and made no effort to hide their connection. It was as if they'd convinced themselves that their secret was safe because I was too oblivious or too weak to do anything about it. They were wrong on both counts. The breaking point came on a Friday evening when Jessa announced that she'd be spending the weekend at a work retreat in Pittsburgh. She packed a bag with clothes I'd never seen before, expensive outfits that must have come from that mysterious shopping trip. "It's a team-building thing," she explained. "Trust exercises and strategic planning. Very boring." "Sounds important." "It is. This could really help my career advancement." I helped her carry her bag to the car and kissed her goodbye, playing the role of the supportive husband. Then I watched her drive away to spend the weekend with her lover. That night, I called Maddie. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better than expected. I wanted to thank you for what you did at the party. I hated having to show you that, but I couldn't let it continue without you knowing." "How long has everyone known?" There was a pause. "Reid." "How long, Maddie?" "A couple of months, maybe longer. People have seen them around town together." "And nobody thought to tell me?" "We weren't sure how. And honestly, some people thought you already knew and were choosing to ignore it." The idea that I'd been the subject of whispered conversations and pitying looks for months added another layer to my humiliation. I'd been the oblivious husband, the last to know, the object of gossip and speculation. "What are you going to do?" Maddie asked. "I'm going to handle it." "Reid, please don't do anything stupid. Don't worry. I'm going to be very smart about this." On Monday morning, I implemented the first phase of my plan. I visited our bank and removed half of the money from our joint savings account, depositing it into a new account in my name only. Legally, I was entitled to this money, and it would prevent Jessa from draining the account if she suspected I was onto her. Next, I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy and my retirement account, removing Jessa and naming Maddie instead. Again, perfectly legal and something I should have done months ago. Then I did something that gave me more satisfaction than it probably should have. I removed Jessa from my health insurance plan. She could get coverage through her own employer, but it would cost her significantly more money. When Jessa returned from her work retreat on Sunday evening, she was glowing with the kind of happiness I hadn't seen from her in years. She talked about the team-building exercises and strategic planning sessions with enthusiasm that would have been convincing if I hadn't known she'd spent the weekend in bed with Liam Mallory. "It sounds like it was very productive," I said. "It really was. I feel like I've got a much clearer vision for my future now." "That's wonderful. I'm happy for you." She gave me a strange look, as if my supportiveness was somehow suspicious, which it was. On Tuesday, she discovered the changes to our bank account. "Reid, what happened to our savings?" I looked up from my laptop, where I was working on a particularly complex network security issue. "What do you mean?" "Half the money is gone. I moved it to a separate account. I thought it would be safer to diversify our holdings." "You moved it without discussing it with me. You've been so busy with work lately, I didn't want to bother you with financial details. That's our money, Reid. You can't just move it around without telling me." "Actually, I can. It's a joint account. which means either of us has full access to the funds. She stared at me, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. For the first time, she was wondering if I knew more than I was letting on. I want you to move it back. Why? Because it's our money. And it still is, it's just in a different account. Reid, what's going on with you? You've been acting strange for weeks. I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. Strange how? Different. Distant. Like you're planning something. I'm not planning anything, Jessa. I'm just trying to be more responsible about our finances. By making unilateral decisions? Like you've been doing with your career? The comment hit its mark. Jessa's face flushed, and she turned away from me. That's different. Is it? My career decisions don't affect you directly. Don't they? She didn't answer, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. For the first time since I'd discovered her affair, Jessa was worried. She was starting to realize that the husband she'd been taking for granted might not be as passive as she'd assumed. That night, I heard her on the phone in the bathroom, her voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. She was scared. Good. She should be. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was debugging a network issue that had been plaguing the city's traffic management system. I recognized the number. It was one of Jessa's work friends, a woman named Tiffany, who had always treated me like an inconvenient accessory to my wife's social life. Reid, it's Tiffany. I think we need to talk. About what? About what you're doing to Jessa. I leaned back in my chair, intrigued. This was an unexpected development. I'm not sure what you mean. The bank account, the insurance, the way you've been acting. Jessa is really upset. She's upset about our financial planning? Don't play dumb, Reid. We know you know. The admission hung in the air between us. Finally, someone was acknowledging the elephant in the room. Know what exactly? About Liam. What about Liam? Look, I get it, you're hurt, but punishing Jessa financially isn't going to solve anything. I almost laughed at the audacity. Punishing her? Moving money around, canceling her insurance. It's petty and vindictive. Tiffany, I've been married to Jessa for 6 years. In that time, I've paid most of our bills, covered her student loans, and supported her career changes. The money I moved is money I earned. The insurance I canceled was coverage I was providing. How exactly is that punishment? Because you're doing it to hurt her. No, I'm doing it to protect myself. There was a pause. Jessa made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end your marriage. People work through these things. Do they? If you really loved her, you'd try to fight for her instead of playing these games. Interesting perspective. Does Liam know that Jessa is married? Of course he knows. And he's fine with that? It's complicated. I'm sure it is. Tell me, Tiffany, how long have you been helping my wife cheat on me? I haven't been helping her do anything. Really? Because it seems like you know an awful lot about her relationship with Liam. Have you been covering for her, making excuses, helping her come up with alibis? The silence stretched long enough to give me my answer. Jessa is my friend, Tiffany finally said. I support her. Even when she's destroying her marriage? Her marriage was already in trouble. Liam just helped her realize that she deserves better. The comment was designed to wound, but instead it clarified something for me. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about a group of people who had decided that I wasn't good enough for Jessa and had been actively encouraging her to find someone else. Better than what? Better than a guy who's content to fix computers for the city for the rest of his life. Better than someone who has no ambition, no drive to improve himself. I see. And Liam represents improvement? Liam is successful. He's going places. He sells real estate in a fading city, Tiffany. He's not exactly Donald Trump. At least he's trying to build something. What are you building, Reid? The question stung because it touched on insecurities I'd been carrying for years. While my college friends had moved to bigger cities and climbed corporate ladders, I'd stayed in my hometown, content with a stable job and a quiet life. I'd thought Jessa shared that vision. Apparently, I'd been wrong. "I'm building a life," I said. Or at least I was. "It's not too late to change. You could still fight for her." "Why would I want to fight for someone who doesn't want to be fought for?" "Because that's what people do when they love someone." "No, Tiffany, that's what people do when they're desperate." "I'm not desperate." I hung up and sat in my office, processing the conversation. It had confirmed what I'd suspected. Jessa's affair wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake. It was a deliberate choice, supported and encouraged by her friends, who saw me as an obstacle to her happiness. The realization was liberating. I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I'd failed as a husband, if there was something I could have done differently. Now I understood that this wasn't about my shortcomings. This was about Jessa deciding that she wanted a different life and being too cowardly to end our marriage before pursuing it. That evening, I was waiting when Jessa came home from work. She looked nervous, probably because Tiffany had warned her about our conversation. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About us. About our marriage." "What about it?" "Reid, I know you know about Liam." Finally. After weeks of lies and evasion, she was ready to have an honest conversation. "What about Liam?" "About my relationship with him." "What kind of relationship?" She sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. "We've been seeing each other." "Seeing each other how?" "Reid, don't make this harder than it has to be. I'm just trying to understand. Are you friends? Business associates? What exactly is your relationship with Liam?" "We're involved." "Involved how?" "Romantically." "So, you're having an affair." The word hung between us like a physical presence. Jessa flinched as if I'd slapped her. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it? You're married to me, but you're romantically involved with someone else. That's the definition of an affair." "Our marriage has been over for a long time, Reid. We've just been going through the motions." "Our marriage has been over? When did we decide that?" "We didn't decide it. It just happened." "I see. And when exactly did it happen? Before or after you started sleeping with Liam?" "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears that might have been genuine. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I met Liam at a networking event, and we just connected. He makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years." "And I don't?" "Reid, we're different people than we were when we got married. We want different things." "What do you want?" "I want to feel excited about my life. I want to be with someone who challenges me, who pushes me to be better." "And Liam does that?" "Yes." "By taking you to expensive restaurants and buying you lingerie?" She looked surprised that I knew about the lingerie. "It's not about the money." "No? Then what's it about?" "It's about feeling valued, feeling special. When I'm with Liam, I feel like the most important person in the world. And when you're with me? When I'm with you, I feel like we're just roommates going through the motions." The honesty was brutal, but not surprising. I'd felt the distance between us growing for months, but I'd attributed it to work stress and the normal ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. "So what do you want to do about it?" "I want a divorce." There it was. The words I'd been expecting but somehow still wasn't prepared to hear. "Because you want to be with Liam?" "Because I want to be happy. And you can't be happy with me?" "Can you be happy with me? Knowing what you know?" It was a fair question. Could I forgive her affair? Could we rebuild trust and intimacy after everything that had happened? Could I spend the rest of my life wondering if she was thinking about someone else when she looked at me? "No," I said. "I don't think I can." "Then we agree." "Do we?" Because it seems like you've been making decisions about our marriage without consulting me for months. What do you mean? I mean, you decided our marriage was over, you decided to have an affair, and now you've decided you want a divorce. When exactly was I supposed to have input into any of these decisions? Reid, You what? You were protecting my feelings? You were trying to spare me the pain of knowing that my wife had checked out of our marriage and was sleeping with someone else? I was trying to figure out what I wanted, while spending our money on dates with your boyfriend and lying to me about work emergencies. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me. You humiliated me in front of my entire family. You made me look like a fool to everyone who knew us. You stole months of my life by letting me think we had a marriage worth saving. Tears were streaming down her face now, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old tenderness I'd once felt for her. But it passed quickly, replaced by something harder and more resolved. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Are you? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" "I'm sorry for the way it happened. I should have been honest with you from the beginning." "Yes, you should have, but you weren't, and now we have to deal with the consequences." "What does that mean?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd planned to raise children and grow old together. "It means you're going to get your divorce, Jessa, but it's going to cost you more than you think." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I have documented evidence of your affair. Bank records, phone logs, photographs. In this state, adultery affects asset distribution." "You've been spying on me?" "I've been protecting myself, there's a difference." "Reid, you're scaring me." I turned back to face her, and I could see that she was genuinely frightened. Good. She should understand that actions have consequences. "I'm not going to hurt you, Jessa. But I'm not going to let you walk away from this marriage with half of everything I've worked for while you were spending our money on your affair. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to lie to me for months? Was it fair to humiliate me in public? Was it fair to let me find out about your affair from my sister instead of having the courage to tell me yourself?" She didn't answer, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was realizing that the divorce she'd envisioned, a quick, amicable split that would free her to be with Liam, wasn't going to happen. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you to move out. Tonight." "Reid, you want a divorce? Fine. But you don't get to have your affair and live in the house I'm paying for while you figure out your next move. You made your choice. Now live with it." "Where am I supposed to go?" "I'm sure Liam has room at his condo, or you can stay with Tiffany. I don't really care." "You're being cruel." "No, I'm being honest. For the first time in months, someone in this marriage is being completely honest." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to find some trace of the man she'd married, the one who would have begged her to stay and work things out. That man was gone. "I'll pack a bag," she said finally. "Take whatever you need. We can figure out the rest later." She went upstairs, and I listened to her moving around in our bedroom, opening drawers and closets. 20 minutes later, she came back down with a suitcase and her laptop bag. "I'll call you in a few days when I've figured out my living situation. You can call my lawyer, Sarah Mitchell. I'll have her contact information sent to you." "Reid, it doesn't have to be like this. We can handle this civilly." "You're right. It didn't have to be like this. But you made choices that led us here, and now we both have to live with them." She opened her mouth as if to say something else, then closed it and walked toward the door. "Jessa?" She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes. "Leave your key." The hope faded. She set her house key on the table by the door and walked out into the night, carrying her suitcase toward a future she'd chosen over the one we'd planned together. I locked the door behind her and stood in the sudden silence of the house we'd shared for 3 years. For the first time since I'd walked into that community center and seen my wife in another man's arms, I felt something approaching peace. The hardest part was over. Now came the part I was going to enjoy. 3 weeks after Jessa moved out, I received a call from her lawyer. Richard Castellanos had a reputation as one of the city's more aggressive divorce attorneys, which told me everything I needed to know about how Jessa intended to handle our split. Mr. Trenner, I represent Jessica Roven in her divorce proceedings. I'm calling to see if we can reach an amicable settlement without unnecessary litigation. What did you have in mind? My client is prepared to offer a 50-50 split of all marital assets, with each party keeping their respective retirement accounts and personal property. I almost laughed. That's generous of her. It's a fair offer that would save both parties significant legal expenses. Mr. Castellanos, has your client explained the circumstances of our divorce? She's indicated that the marriage broke down due to irreconcilable differences. Is that what she called it? There was a pause. Are you suggesting there are other factors we should consider? I'm suggesting that your client committed adultery, used marital funds to support her affair, and abandoned the marital home to live with her lover. In Pennsylvania, those are relevant factors in asset distribution. Mr. Trenner, accusations of adultery can be difficult to prove, and often lead to expensive, contentious litigation that benefits no one. I agree. Fortunately, I won't need to make accusations. I have evidence. Another pause, longer this time. What kind of evidence? The kind that would be very embarrassing for your client if it became part of the public record. I see. Perhaps we should schedule a meeting to discuss this further. Perhaps we should. The meeting took place in Sarah Mitchell's office the following week. Jessa arrived with her lawyer and a defiant expression that didn't quite hide her nervousness. She'd lost weight since moving out, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she wasn't sleeping well. Reid, she said with a nod. Jessa. We sat across from each other at a polished conference table while our lawyers spread documents between us like battle plans. My client has prepared a comprehensive settlement offer, Castellanos began, sliding a folder across the table. Sarah reviewed it quickly, her expression neutral. Your client wants 50% of the marital home's equity, 50% of joint savings, and spousal support for 2 years. Given that both parties are employed professionals with similar incomes, we believe this represents a fair division. Except for the spousal support, Sarah replied. My client sees no justification for that, given the circumstances. What circumstances? Sarah opened her own folder and began laying out photographs, bank statements, and phone records. The circumstances of Mrs. Roven's 3-month affair with Liam Mallory, during which she used approximately $4,000 in marital funds for restaurants, hotels, and personal items that benefited her extramarital relationship. Jessa's face went pale as she saw the evidence spread across the table. Photographs of her and Liam at restaurants, entering his condo building, kissing in parking lots. Bank records showing cash withdrawals and credit card charges. Phone logs documenting hundreds of calls and text messages. This is an invasion of privacy, Castellanos said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is documentation of marital waste and adultery, Sarah replied, all obtained legally and admissible in court. What do you want? Jessa asked, speaking directly to me for the first time. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. Reid, please. Can't we just end this without destroying each other? You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy our marriage. I made a mistake. You made a choice, multiple choices, over multiple months. You chose to lie to me, to cheat on me, to humiliate me, and to waste our money on your affair. Now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. Castellanos leaned forward. What are you proposing? Sarah slid another document across the table. Mr. Trenner keeps the house and assumes full responsibility for the mortgage. Mrs. Roven keeps her car and her personal belongings. They split the remaining joint savings 50-50, minus the $4,000 Mrs. Roven spent on her affair, which will be credited to Mr. Trenner. No spousal support for either party. That's ridiculous, Jessa said. I have rights to half of everything we built together. You forfeited those rights when you decided to build something with someone else, I replied. I won't agree to this. Then we'll go to court, Sarah said calmly, where all of this evidence will become part of the public record. Your affair, your lies, your financial misconduct, all of it available to anyone who wants to look it up. I watched Jessa process this information. She was ambitious, image-conscious, and building a career in HR where reputation mattered. A public divorce trial featuring detailed evidence of her affair would follow her for years. I need to discuss this with my client, Castellanos said. Of course, you have 48 hours to respond. After they left, I sat in Sarah's office feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Satisfaction. How do you think they'll respond? I asked. They'll take the deal. She can't afford to have this go to trial. And if they don't? Then we'll destroy her in court and probably get an even better settlement. That evening, I drove through the city where I'd spent my entire adult life, seeing it with new eyes. The abandoned factories and empty storefronts that had once depressed me now seemed like opportunities. The quiet neighborhoods and familiar faces that had once felt limiting now felt like home. I'd spent years listening to Jessa complain about our life here, about my lack of ambition, about the small scope of my dreams. I'd started to believe that she was right, that I was settling for less than I deserved. Now I understood that she was the one who was settling. She'd traded a marriage built on love and partnership for an affair based on excitement and status. She'd given up a man who would have done anything for her for one who was sleeping with a married woman. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. It was Maddie. How did the meeting go? Better than expected. I think this will be over soon. How are you holding up? Honestly, better than I thought I would. I feel like I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in months. Any regrets? I considered the question as I looked at the house Jessa and I had bought together, where we'd planned to build a life. 3 weeks ago, it had felt like a mausoleum of failed dreams. Tonight, it felt like a fresh start. No, I said. No regrets. The call from Castellanos came the next afternoon. My client accepts your settlement offer with one modification. She wants to keep her grandmother's china set. Done. She also wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of the divorce. I almost laughed. Even in defeat, Jessa was trying to control the narrative. No. She's prepared to offer additional compensation. Mr. Castellanos, your client cheated on me, lied to me, and humiliated me in front of my family and friends. I'm not going to help her hide the truth about what she did. I understand your position, but no NDA. If she's worried about people knowing what she did, she should have thought about that before she did it. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courthouse conference room and signed the papers that officially ended my marriage. Jessa was there, looking small and defeated, her signature shaky on the documents that would reshape both of our lives. Reid, she said as we prepared to leave, I want you to know that I never meant for things to end this way. How did you mean for them to end? I don't know. I just thought, I hoped we could find a way to be happy. We could have been happy, Jessa. We were happy for a while. But you decided that wasn't enough. I know I made mistakes. You made choices, and now you get to live with them. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I hope you find someone who makes you happy. I hope you figure out what happiness actually means. I walked out of the courthouse a single man for the first time in 6 years, carrying nothing but my car keys and a sense of completion I hadn't felt in months. That evening, I called my parents. How are you doing, son? My father asked. I'm good, Dad, really good. We're proud of you for how you handled this. It couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, but it was necessary. What's next? I looked around the house that was now entirely mine, thinking about the possibilities that stretched ahead of me. I'm going to live my life on my own terms for a while. See what that feels like. Sounds like a good plan. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in years, I was excited about the future. Not because I was planning revenge or plotting against my ex-wife, but because I was finally free to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be the man someone else wanted me to be. Jessa had been right about one thing. We had wanted different things. She'd wanted excitement, status, and the thrill of constant change. I wanted stability, loyalty, and the deep satisfaction of building something that would last. She'd chosen her path, and now I was free to choose mine. 6 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Jessa and Liam had broken up. Apparently, the excitement of their affair hadn't translated well to the reality of an actual relationship. She'd moved to Pittsburgh to take a job with a larger firm, starting over in a city where no one knew about her failed marriage. I felt no satisfaction in her misfortune, no vindication in the failure of the relationship she'd chosen over our marriage. By then, I was too busy building my new life to spend much time thinking about my old one. I'd started a consulting business, helping small municipalities upgrade their IT infrastructure. The work was challenging and rewarding, and I was making more money than I ever had as a city employee. I'd also started dating again, carefully and selectively, looking for someone who shared my values instead of someone who made me question them. The house felt different now, not empty, but peaceful. I'd redecorated, removing the traces of my life with Jessa and creating something that was entirely my own. The guest room had become a home office, and I'd converted the basement into a workshop where I restored vintage computers in my spare time. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a good life. More importantly, it was my life, built on my terms, with my priorities and my values at the center. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about the man I'd been when I was married to Jessa. Insecure, apologetic, constantly trying to prove that I was worthy of her love. That man felt like a stranger to me now, someone I'd known briefly, but never really understood. I didn't miss him, and I didn't miss her. What I'd found instead was something I'd never expected, the deep satisfaction of being exactly who I was, without apology or compromise. It had taken the destruction of my marriage to teach me that the most important relationship I would ever have was the one with myself. In the end, Jessa had done me a favor. She'd forced me to choose between the comfortable lie of our failing marriage and the difficult truth of who I actually was. I'd chosen the truth, and it had set me free.